Well, today I've got Raser Rowland with me, and she's a co-author of a fantastic book called The Art of Frugal Hedonism. And for those that are consuming this via YouTube, you'll be able to see a copy. And front covers, it's a great piece of artwork too. So for that reason alone, it's worth having a look. So firstly, welcome, Annie, and thanks very much for making some time to have a chat with me
Hi,
today.
it's a pleasure, Paul.
Very, very excited to have you on. Now, I guess I want the listeners, and I'm curious myself, to get a sense of, the normal kind of life arrangement and work and that sort of stuff for you, because I get the sense that it's far from the typical Monday to Friday 9 to 5. So can you give us a sense of what your normal week looks like?
I would have to say it's hard to define a normal week, and that is part of kind of the lifestyle that I'm talking about. At the moment, I can pretty much fall into a bit of a 9 to 5 category in that I'm working on another book and I'm pretty excited about that. And so I've spent often from kind of 8 till 2 every day doing writing and research for that. And then I'll often do some kind of exercise, like I'll go for a huge walk for an hour or go rock climbing, or when it was a bit sunnier, I was renting a kayak down on the Yarra River and going for a kayak along there. Or I'll just do an hour of yoga at home if I'm working from home. I mix up between the library and working from home a lot, right, because I find that when you're working on solitary projects, that you can go a bit stir crazy if you stay at home and work all the time.
I could imagine, yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll hopefully get back and do a couple of hours more work after doing that exercise break to rejuvenate myself. Mm-hmm. And then in the evening, I'll be making dinner and making packed lunches for the next day if I'm going into the library, or just not to disrupt my working day too much. So it actually is a bit 9 to 5-ish at the moment. Okay. But then, if it's a stunning day, I'll say, it's criminal to work today. You're going to make the most of stunning days. I'm going to spend the whole day cycling around the neighborhood, visiting different friends, or just sitting and reading and maybe doing a bit of research reading, or just sheer pleasure reading down by the creek somewhere, or go catch a train somewhere to go for a walk along the beach or something like that. And then I'll do 1 day a week on the weekend of work at my wage job.
Right.
And that's sort of my staple money that I rely on to just cover all of my basic living expenses, okay, which means that the rest of the time is devoted to the other projects of life.
Geez, that's pretty good to get to be in a position, and I guess that's the nature of the book, really, isn't it? In terms of the frugality element, but that 1 day a week of paid employment is enough to get you through.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is definitely, it's supplemented by the fact that I get royalties from 2 books at this point, and that I do speaking appearances about once a month once you average it out through the year. Okay. And that because I've always been good at saving, I've got interest coming in from investments, and you add all that up, and it's a very, very low living wage if you added all those things together, but it's more than enough for me, I find, and I still keep saving despite that level of employment.
Geez, well done. Well done. So when, like at the moment, you said that's your normal day because you're writing a book, but presumably you're not always writing books. So if you weren't writing a book, what would your week entail?
Sometimes it's been traveling. I have spent quite a lot of my adult life on long travel adventures, right, and especially long distance hikes. That's a really, really key part of my life. And I think it's where I have learned a lot of stuff about appreciating what really makes us happy and how much you really need to survive. It just recalibrates your entire sense of what is materially important and how do you get the most pleasure out of those material comforts. And it's definitely not by having more of them. Most of the time it's about contrasting those material comforts with things that are more rigorous or tougher. Like whatever you eat for dinner when you have hiked all day will taste amazing because you've been hiking all day. And you take a lesson like that and you apply it to the rest of life.
Yeah.
And it fans out and it has effects that ripple into your finances and your health and all those kind of things. If I wasn't traveling in some form, then, because when I'm working, I do like to work most days of the week on a project that I care about. Then I'll go through long phases where I don't really do any work beyond keeping up with emails and so on related to the book and workshops and so on. It will be more just about hanging out with friends and babysitting for friends and so on, because as someone that doesn't have kids, I feel like that's an important source of energy and also social credit in my life, and that I'm aware of the fact that because I'm not someone that goes out and socializes by meeting lots of friends at restaurants for expensive dinners, that it's good to cultivate those different strands of sociability that come from, say, going around to someone's house and hanging out with them for an hour before you hang out with their kids for the evening.
Yep.
As well as just going around and having cups of tea with them or whatever it is, or having them come around to your house and have dinner. It adds more variety and flavor, and means that when I do want to do something, like borrow something from a friend, because I try not to buy things if there's something that can be borrowed, that you've got a little bit of that credit there and that goodwill. It's
a bit easier to ask, for sure. And I'd imagine having someone volunteer for some, for some babysitting or childcare would be, pretty welcomely received.
Yeah, people foam at the mouth generally.
Yeah, and so a lot of your life now is writing. Did you train as a writer, or were you a journalist?
No,
out of university or anything like that, or?
No, I've always had a love of words, and I've always been a very heavy reader. And I think once I tipped into the point where I realized I had too much that I wanted to say to affect other people's thinking, visual art, which is what I used to do more, felt a harder and harder ask to get out there. Whereas you can get writing out to lots of people a lot more easily. And, I'm passionate about visual art, and I think it does really affect people in all sorts of ways that are more subtle than maybe a written work can do. Yep. But you can reach a lot more people generally if you write something and you manage to get it published. Yep. And for me, it's one of those activities where I feel like even when it's so hard, and everything they say about writing is that it is frequently so hard, and if you're having a bad writing day, you feel like life is just rubbish and you're worthless and you can't make this work. All of those cliches about writing are true. But for me, it's one of those activities that brings me into a, as they say, flow state. Yep. Where time kind of stops when you're doing it, and it becomes all you really care about doing. And that when you do it well, the converse of all those bad days is that you just feel on cloud 9, and like your entire life has a point when you do it well. And I think when you hit on things like that, you should keep doing them.
Yeah, it makes sense. And on those bad days, I'm interested, what's your approach? Do you write anyway and just figure it doesn't matter because I can edit it later if I need to? Or do you say, you know what, it's just not happening today, I'm going to go and do something else?
6 of one, half a dozen of the other. If you really feel like you can't even bring your attention to the work at all, then for me, often that's a sign that I need more physical activity. Right. And that's one that I try not to ignore too much, because I am I was the nerd at high school that was no good at sports, but I'm a very physical person in another way. And I will then go try and do something physical and see if after doing that, even if it's just put on music for half an hour and dance like a maniac in my living room, that can really help. But there's lots of, I'm 41 years old and I've experienced enough occasions of going, this feels really hard and like it's not working, to know that you just push through that and it adds up.
Yep.
It's a horrible feeling when you feel like you can't make anything work and you look at the end of the day and you feel like you've almost gone backwards. But you have to have those days to then have the next day that might be a really good day.
sometimes, you know, you read back a week later on what you wrote on that hard day and actually go, actually, that's not too bad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do actually. Or you say, oh, that bit in there was really core, and no wonder I was having a hard time elucidating it. But I see now how to do that.
Yeah, nice. Now, just to take a slightly different tack, but I wanted to talk to you about the concept of retirement,
Yeah.
which, you know, is very much tied to, I guess, a standard approach to work. You know, if you start somewhere in maybe your early 20s or something in a career, and you toil away, and somewhere 60-ish, you know, you pull the pin, and then you go and do your travel and all your other bits and pieces. Now, from already what you've touched on, you know, your life journey looks a lot different to that. So therefore,
Yeah.
I'd just like your thoughts on retirement. Is that something that even enters your brain, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, lots of people would almost define what I'm doing now as a form of retirement, given that I work so little. Lots of people will maintain working one day a week into retirement. Obviously, I'm doing another form of
That's right.
self-directed work for most of the time, so it's not retirement as such. Retirement of a non-working variety holds no appeal for me personally. I mean, I'm much more of the school of, say, David Attenborough, where as long as I'm getting to do stuff I love, then I just expect to do that until I die. I mean,
he's a great example. Yeah,
he's a fantastic example. For me, lashing out and relaxing is something that I do intermittently in the life I have anyway, when I feel like I've done enough work to feel satiated, and I don't feel like I have a backlog of that where I've spent so many 6-month periods in my life just traveling and hiking and lying in the sun in the desert on a sleeping bag looking at the midday sky, or being in Portugal and walking through goat-filled hills eating figs in the sun, that I just don't see that there's anything that I'm missing out on at this point that I want to retire for,
Yeah.
So I guess the shift into retirement for me would be a lot more about something where I felt like there was no impetus to change any work I did to make it fit a market any better. And I'm not even sure that I do that at this point. I still think that the only reason that with what I'm writing that I want to make that as accessible as possible to as many people as possible is because I want to touch and affect as many people as possible, not because I'm somehow compromising what I actually want to say. But maybe, like the promotions around having written something and so on, I would be a lot slacker on if I was retired.
Yeah.
That's the only difference I can really imagine it making. But lots of people don't function like me and would love to spend a lot more time just being really lazy and doing things that had very little endpoint. And I am very open to that approach. It doesn't suit my personality type because I'm a very hungry person. But I do think that we in general have gotten quite culturally addicted to achievement, and that it's often very destructive. It's destructive in orienting everything towards a growth economy and towards needing to get richer and richer throughout your life and needing to have a more economic activity. And obviously that's not feasible in a planet of finite resources. And a lot of the research that Adam and I did for the Art of Frugal Hedonism, we learned more and more about the fact that this inherent valuing of spending your time working as being almost a moral good and as the basic activity of life that everyone should just assume will fill the majority of their days. It's a fairly novel cultural construction.
Yeah.
And that for lots of history, people went, well, I'll just work as much as I need to get myself somewhere to live and something to eat. And then I'll go hang out with my friends.
Yeah.
And
Did you read the Sapiens, the book Sapiens?
Yeah, I did.
I
Yeah.
read that recently, and he pointed out that in a lot of the, like, I think it was Aboriginal culture, or certainly the older sort of hunter-gatherer type societies, that as best, and obviously I don't know how really they judge this, but anyhow, somehow or other, the academics have, tried to nut it out. And I think they estimated that in those days, that the time they spent sort of working, in a sense, generating food and whatever, was sort of 15 to 20 hours a week.
Yeah, yeah. And there's even speculation that because lots of those remaining indigenous cultures are living in quite marginal land that hasn't otherwise been taken up by development, that people living in sort of subtropical areas where food is even more abundant and easier to come by would have worked less than that.
Yeah.
But lots of those cultures didn't have a word that distinguished work and play.
Yeah, okay. But it probably also explains, say, somewhere like Peru, where food was extraordinarily easy to come by, it gave you lots of time to build, the Machu Picchus of the world, right? Because you didn't need to devote a lot of time to food production.
Yeah, you develop that leisure and intellectual class that then can do non-essential things.
Yeah. And I guess I assume there's probably slave labour in getting the work done, but still, at least the society was able to function without everyone all the time, producing food or doing what they needed to do just to survive.
Well, I mean, that is an interesting thing about the change in post-industrial society, is that we could function at a much lower amount of paid wage labour than we do at this point. There was amazing stuff coming out right through from the 20s to the 50s with leading public intellectuals and sociologists talking about, I mean, there's even quotes that we have in the book from American presidential speeches of Eisenhower, and all of them were fairly unanimous that the big problem for the future is going to be that as the returns of mechanization started to trickle through society, that there would be so little work for people to do to meet basic needs, that the great social problem would be, how would we keep ourselves entertained for all of this leisure time? And some of them were very positive about it, and we're saying that the biggest issue will be how to direct all of this free time into the growth of the spirit and humankind's finer traits, the arts, debate, cultural productions, and others were taking a bit more the tone of, people have so little work to do that we're going to have to figure out how to keep them occupied. But that was people speaking from a point that we were already producing all of the material goods that we could possibly want, because people considered themselves to have enough.
Mm-hmm.
And in the time since then and now, we've increased the efficiency of output by over 200%, and yet we haven't returned any of those dividends into working less.
Which I know is something that
We've just created new economies and a higher level of material comfort expectations.
So, which leads into sort of where I wanted to explore next. So, was that the motivation for you writing The Art of Frugal Hedonism, or what was the spark that got you started on writing this book?
It was getting to an age where lots of my peers were moving into higher paying jobs, from having, skilled up a bit and just gotten themselves more where they wanted to be. And yet, instead of seeming happier and less stressed about money than they had been before, they seemed generally more stressed about money and unhappy. And Adam and I both felt that we just weren't experiencing that trajectory at all. That we had upped our earning capacity just through getting older and getting more skills and more experience, but that we hadn't ever really taken up spending much more of it than we kind of had when we were in our very early 20s. And we wanted to figure out what we had done. And it was stark enough that I guess I knew that I constantly had my money piling up in the bank, and I was hearing all of my friends feel stressed about having to wait for the next paycheck, even though lots of them were earning twice as much as me. And I had a couple of friends within the space of 1 month say, what are you doing? Like, how do you do this? It seems you always just go traveling whenever you want to. You always take time off work whenever you want to. And I thought, well, that's a question that's worth answering. How do I do that? What am I doing that's different than what you do? And I started sort of bullet pointing some stuff, and I sat down with Adam and said, let's have a brainstorm and see if we can figure out if there's some key things that we do. And we figured out that a lot of it was attitudinal, that it was about the psychology of what we considered rewarding ourselves or treating ourselves, or of being enough, or of when convenience was worth it and when it wasn't worth it. And the psychology of what money was for, whether it was for instant gratification or for greater pleasures that we wanted to experience down the track. And we realized that we had a pretty robust kit of mental tools and sort of life strategies that we were using to mean that we were never stressed about money, and that we always had more than we could use, basically. And that seemed like something worth writing a book about.
And you and Adam were very much on the same page with this, or was it the case that one of you sort of come into the relationship with that mindset and brought the other one around? You know?
No, we were both cut from pretty similar cloth in that way.
Yeah.
Right down to, I think both of us have never scrimped on spending on things that we really want to do. Adam wanted to do a soil biology course with a world-renowned lecturer, and he spent $3,000 just at the drop of a hat on doing that, because it was like, this is the world leader in this thinking at this point. This is a 2-week intensive course. I really want to know this stuff. Yeah. I really wanted to go on a hot air balloon flight, and even though that cost $600, I thought, this is an experience that is going to feed into my dream landscape for the rest of my life and will be unlike anything else I ever do. Like, we have never been stingy about that kind of thing once we know that it's really going to add to our lives. Because, well, and this is something we go into in the book, I actually find that doing those sorts of things occasionally is protective against feeling deprived on a day-to-day level, because it sends a message to your brain, even if you're someone that is just having homemade dal and rice for dinner for 5 nights out of the week. It sends a message to your brain that, oh, but I'm someone that can take hot air balloon flights. I'm definitely not poor and suffering here.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm choosing to eat that simple food, partly because it's actually good for me and it's delicious and it's easy to make and means I don't have to go out thinking about what I want to cook all the time. But as well as having its own inherent value, it's an awareness that I live in those ways in certain arenas so that I can have the money to do those truly magnificent things. Yes. That feed me for the rest of the time.
And I guess an element of that is not having huge debts and commitments and things that tie you down, so that you can, if you want to travel, those kind of things, you've got that flexibility. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's something that has shifted for me in the last while. I finished paying off my house last year and actually sold it because I felt like I had been tied down by being in a house that I owned that needed constant upkeep and so on for the last 17 years. I bought it very young. I put a deposit on a house. And yeah, there's a lot of value in that. And it is one thing that I would say to lots of people whose entire reason for saving is that desire to have a house, is that having done both, there's a lot of beauty in not having that commitment and that responsibility.
Yeah.
But at the same time, probably because of having started paying off that mortgage at such a young age, it sort of forced my hand in maintaining, because I hated being in debt and I never wanted to, not make those payments.
Yeah.
It forced my hand into developing very frugal habits into early adulthood, when lots of friends were possibly going, "Whoa, look, I've got my first good paycheck. I'm really excited. I'm going to go spend this on an amazing outfit and a bottle of Bombay Sapphire and living it up for a couple of days."
Yeah.
For me, it was just from the word go. It was like, no, I don't do any of that stuff. I just want to pay this thing. I get fun in other ways.
Yeah. And I'd imagine that must have, starting that so early and getting that now paid off. I mean, that must be a great financial foundation, to have as a base, right?
Yeah, it gives me the freedom to do what I'm doing now.
Gee, well done. So how has the book been received? It's been out for a couple of years now. How has it gone?
Yeah, fantastically. I still, to anyone that ever considers writing an author a letter, don't hesitate, because when we reply to those letters and say we love getting this, we actually mean it.
Yep.
Because you spend these couple of years in total hair-pulling isolation, as I talked about, and not sure if anyone will ever receive the things that you're trying to say. And when you get those letters coming back, it feels amazing. It feels like you're really touching people, especially when you know that only 1 out of every 20 people who's affected is actually going to bother writing, that every one of those letters speaks volumes for all the other people that didn't write a letter. One of the feedbacks that has interested me the most is how many people say that this is stuff, that the content of the book is stuff that they were already thinking and feeling, but just needed a voice to give them the encouragement to live out a little more. People saying, I felt like this kind of work and spend debt cycle that I was in, there was just something wrong with that, and that's not how I want to live out my life. And I read your book and I stayed up all night rethinking finances, or sat down and talked to my partner about things that we could change, and we've reshaped things in our lives, and we're really seeing the difference. And there's a couple of them where I've cried, of people saying this was the book that we'd been waiting for. We had a conversation after this and we saw some of the things we've been getting wrong and where we'd fallen off the track that we said we were going to walk on for our lives, and we've now changed all these things around and we're getting healthier and our debts are getting paid off faster. And to have that kind of impact is just amazing. And then you get the really simple ones where, because lots of the book is about how nourishing your very human need for playfulness and pleasure is one of the best defenses against being susceptible to advertising messages that say you need this to be happy, you need that to be unhappy. If you're already feeling fairly content in your life, then you're much less susceptible to those messages. So a lot of the book is about finding that kind of sustenance and pleasure and play in other areas that are non-monetized.
Yep.
And I've had innumerable letters of people saying, I read your book on the tram on the way to work this morning, and at lunchtime I went out to the nearest park near my office or whatever it is, took my shoes off, just walked around the park and listened to the birds for my whole lunch break. And it felt like one of the best things I've done in my life in the last month. Yeah. And it was totally free. And people giving feedback about really specific little shifts like that, which are the things that seem so small, but they add up to your sense of wealth in life.
Yep. And
mean that you become more and more immune to mass advertising messages about what you need and about what is normal level of consumption. That
must be so energizing for you and encouraging, I imagine. I mean,
it's so gratifying.
Has that informed, because you said, you're writing another book now, is that in any way related to the sort of things that you explored here in The Art of Frugal Hedonism?
It's very obtusely related. Yeah,
Okay.
I'd
Can you
say
share, or is it secret?
maybe a little bit secretive. I've decided to start being secretive, but it has got a foundation in sort of ecology versus cultural thinking, and so right where our sense of human culture interacts with the broader natural world.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
which is always going to feed into our decisions about consumption and pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. So definitely, I mean, it's consistent
Yeah,
themed, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah, which makes sense because obviously, I guess it's you're the writer and it's channeling your thoughts, isn't it, and your
yeah.
interests. So how about? I mean, obviously, I'd encourage people to pick it up. It's a great book, and I've certainly enjoyed it. And again, for people watching on YouTube, you might be able to see there that I've got a whole lot of different tags and things where I've picked up bits and pieces that really spoke to me. But are you able to, just to give people a taste? Are you able to maybe pick one tip out of the book that you think people could run with?
Sure. Probably almost one of the starter tips, which is to redefine your sense of what counts as normal, to just open that up. And in a way, that's not a very helpful tip at all, because the rest of the book is in some degrees about talking about how to do that. But as long as you're comparing what you think of as normal to the person next to you or to the ads in the Saturday paper, you're pretty trapped into a certain kind of working shopping pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And there are tips in the book about how to redefine your sense of normal by doing all sorts of things, like looking at figures from fiction or from other eras that you find inspiring, who lived in times when different things were considered normal, because it makes you realize how arbitrary it is that we've made up a certain concept of normal consumer standards and normal working life behavior at this point that is very limited and is just specific to now. I mean, you can take an incredibly simple example that at this point we consider it completely normal to buy one, if not two, takeaway coffees a day for lots of people.
Yep.
And that is a huge expenditure, and not to mention a huge environmental impact. But even 15 years ago, and definitely 25 years ago, no one was doing that. It just wasn't a thing anyone did. And no one was less happy because of that. And something that simple makes you realize just how absolutely arbitrary what we're considering to be normal consumption patterns is. And once you learn enough to know how people have been very happy at different points in history with very different patterns of consumption, then you realize you get to make up your own pattern of consumption to a degree. There are pressures to fit into the society you live in, but there's a lot of flexibility within that, especially if you know why you're doing it and why it matters to you to do it, i.e. to have freedom or to lower your ecological footprint,
And,
to pay off debt.
and I'd imagine, I mean, your travel would be a bit of a gateway drug there as well, isn't it? Because you
Yeah.
travel to different cultures and you see how other people live, and okay, what I thought was normal isn't so much. I mean, even at a micro level, just thinking back to when I was much younger, but I can recall going from living at home with the parents to going into a share house with three other housemates and discovering that, oh, hang on a minute, not everyone does breakfast the way I've grown up thinking we always do breakfast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're sort of opposite extremes, right? But you're right. There's lots of things that you take for granted as normal that maybe aren't either normal historically or not necessarily normal in different cultures.
Absolutely. And I mean, I use that trick because I live in a big city surrounded by advertising and consumer culture, and I'm susceptible as anyone else. But it's only by repeated action and thought that I have learnt that there is worthwhile payoffs in resisting a lot of those messages, because all it feels like the first handful of times you resist those messages is pain and deprivation.
Yeah.
All you see is that person has that stuff. I'm seeing images of people who have and do this stuff. I don't have and do this stuff. That feels like pain and deprivation. So you need to push past those first handful of that gut emotional reaction, which is what we have been trained to experience. One figure we quote in the book is that over $1,000 of advertising are is spent on each of us per year. And that's, that's a lot of budget by very, very practiced thinkers in emotional manipulation, in having us have those feelings of deprivation when we don't get the thing that we think everyone else has.
Yeah, that is a really, geez, $1,000 per person, US dollars at that, on advertising. Yeah, just to try and get us to consume particular things. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah. Hey, one thought I liked in your book, and I just wanted to share with listeners, and maybe you might have another example, but your idea of third places. So you've got your home, and for most of us, our workplace.
Yes.
And then you suggested, what's some other places that you can sort of hang out and have fun, but it doesn't have to cost you money.
Yes.
And you touched on libraries, and it sounds like in your case, sometimes the library doubles as the workplace, which is good. And certainly my local library here in Moonee Ponds is fantastic. But one I wanted to flag, and you've possibly come across it, is the library at the Docklands. Have you been?
Oh, yes, I have. It's a beautiful one.
It is spectacular. And you go down there on a weekend, you ride the bike in there. They've got great bike tracks to get to Docklands. And it's particularly where the library is, it's just a ghost town. There's always plenty of students in there using the library, but it's quiet, and architecturally it's beautiful.
And it's got views across the water on one side that are stunning. Yeah.
It's a spectacular place. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that one in as my nomination for top third place, and that's in Melbourne. And I guess I'd be interested with listeners if if you've got something similar in your area. As I say, that's a Melbourne example, and so not going to work for everybody. So send me an email. Respond to the Gaining Choice emails that come out each Friday, and let me know your third place, because if we could get a few suggestions, I'll put a bit of a list out on the email so that we can share it amongst everybody, because I think that is a really good idea. If you do want to get out of the house, and you don't want to be looking at the same four walls, and you need a bit of human contact. But it is a challenge if, that is, I'm going to go to the shopping mall or something like that, where can you go and have some outside or some out of the house time and out of the office time that doesn't have to cost you money, and I thought that was a really good tip. Is there, aside from, your local library, have you got any other good ones that you enjoy?
I would never live somewhere that wasn't close to some decent sized parks or waterways, because they are the other definite necessity for that kind of space. And depends on your taste, but for me, I used to, when I lived in different areas of town, I was quite happy bashing around sort of abandoned areas at the back of train lines and so on, and would just go ramble along those like a bit of a hobo for a while.
Right.
For everyone. But any kind of slightly wild outdoor space is really, really good in that way. And it can take a while to find it, but it's just such an important ingredient, I think, in most people's mental health, to have somewhere like that to go to. Yeah. If you're not aiming to work at all, there is actually an incredible number of tours, free tours and so on, of public buildings that can be really nice. I'm not religious, but I've even gone and sat in churches occasionally. Yep. Just if I've had a aesthetically kind of lumpy day where I feel like all I've done is be on ugly trains and maybe gone into a supermarket or walked down some really busy, hectic streets, then you start to feel that little deficit of, I just want something a bit more beautiful in this day. And have gone and sat in the back of a church or something and looked at the stained glass windows and felt the quietness and the smell of wooden pews, and that provides that little space away. It's about anything you can do to give yourself that diversity of texture in your week, that means that you don't then go seeking that diversity in consumer experiences.
Yeah, great tips and great thoughts. Hey, just a little bit of a change of tack, but something I did want to ask you about. So you've written this with Adam, but reading it it's got a fantastic coherent voice. It's it doesn't sound like two people, even though through it, you acknowledge, Annie did this or Adam did that. Like it's all the way through. You're acknowledging that there's two of you that have brought this to life, but it's got a nice, as I say, a nice voice, a nice coherency to it. How did you make that happen? How do you write a book with two people and yet have it flow?
I think some people find working partnerships where that happens amazingly easily. For us, it was a process of negotiation where when we started the book, we were going to both be equal co-writers. And yet I was at a stage where I had a lot more free time and I kept writing more and more than Adam did. And my voice became so dominant within it that we instead decided on it, which is why it's not a co-authored credit for the book. It's Annie with Adam.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So I was the dominant writer, and he has amazing research skills. So
Yep.
he was sort of head honcho in the research department, and he had to put up with me basically coming back with all the pages I'd written every day and saying, this bit's not working, what do you think I should do? And having me read bits out loud, and then he'd say, no, I think that should go before there, or you're totally faffing out on this idea that hasn't been rigorously explored at all. And he'd just say, that's not even funny, go back, make it funnier. So it was a process like that. He was sort of the backup voice to my voice.
And then how does that translate? So the book you're writing now, you're just doing that solo, is that right?
I am, yes. Which I've got to say is a lot more torturous when you don't have that person to come to say, is this good? Is this bad? What should I do next? I'm stuck.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Yeah, it would be really good to, I mean.
So anyone out there that wants to take on that role for this book.
And just something to circle back slightly, but you mentioned at the start that, as part of your normal week, so you do speaking as well, which I gather flows from the books. Is that correct? Or is your speaking totally no, it does flow from the books. Okay. Yeah. So what was the sort of chicken and egg there? Were you doing speaking and then you wrote the books, or? And actually, we should just touch on, you wrote another book before this one. Do you want to just make mention of
that? Yeah, so that one's on foraging for edible and medicinal weeds. It's called the Weed Forager's Handbook. Mm-hmm. And again, it sort of arose out of not the thought of, oh, we want to write a book, but the thought of this book needs to exist and someone should write it. And maybe that someone can be us. Yep. We were both teaching workshops about weeds, myself at Ceres in Brunswick East, and Adam through his business, Very Edible Gardens. And there seemed to be an insatiable hunger to know about what backyard weeds people could eat and what they were, how to cook them and how to identify them and what their nutrition levels were. And we'd both been teaching workshops about that. And we went, let's expand this knowledge and put it into a book. And so that was both a sort of synthesizing of everything of both of our knowledge, and then a whole lot of extra research to back that up as well. Because it was very important to us that for both the books, I'm not naturally a science boffin, but both of us are very, very suspicious of unsubstantiated claims. So both of the books have a really solid research foundation. And so his role in that book, again, was a little bit more dominant on the research side, but it was a much more equal writing process on that one. But that's easier when you've sort of got a field guide type book, as that one was.
Yeah. So, okay. So then the question around, chicken and egg, writing the book versus presentations or speaking engagement, sounds like in that case at least you were doing speaking engagements prior to the book, and that identified the need, and then you went to the book.
Yeah.
And you've already spoken a little bit about how you come to write The Art of Frugal Hedonism. So I assume prior to writing it, you weren't speaking on these topics. Is that right?
No. And when I first started doing speaking engagements for that book, I was actually quite concerned about how to convert that material into a spoken form, because the reason it's a 51 tip book is I feel like all of the stuff in there is really important, and obviously you can't just condense that into a 1 hour speaking session, but it goes down incredibly well, the speaking I do on it, and I find that it becomes as much a process of audience collaboration, of drawing out people's own experiences of what they find mentally difficult about their attitudes towards money, and about things where they feel like they've really nailed it, and people giving feedback about what in the book was most useful to them, to other people that are attending. And it feels like a really meaty and productive session every time that I do it. Yeah. So it turned out I was completely wrong about that. But I mean, I do find that once you have written something, and especially if you've identified an area of knowledge that people are really interested in, you could actually just speak about that as much as you wanted to. I turned down so many potential opportunities to speak about both of those books because the travel time's too far, or I feel like I'm just going to be repeating myself, or it's for an audience that I feel like is not going to get that much out of it. Yeah. But for anyone that wants to really become a public speaker in that way, you write something that has a message that people are really hungry for, and the people come crawling out of the woodwork asking you to give talks.
And was that always part of your plan in writing the book? Is that, in writing it, I guess you're hoping to get sales and make some royalties out of the book, but part of the train of thought was, hopefully also get some speaking engagements, and that's another income stream.
No, I did not want to do that.
Okay, yeah.
I think as most writers will tell you that once you finish writing a book, you start thinking about the next thing that you want to write.
Yeah.
And keep talking about the previous one feels like, oh, that was from then. I've already digested all those ideas. I'm thinking about new stuff now. But that's where your lack of self-absorption has to come into play, as you recognize that you have a responsibility for having stimulated these thoughts in people, and that the reason you wrote the book is that you care about people, and that you almost need to help them birth those thoughts a little bit and actualize them a bit by being a human figure that they can talk to about them, and see your face and see your emotion as you speak about them, because that gives people information through other channels that they don't get through reading it. And I'm from old hippie parents in a way. I do just want to do good in the world, and because you don't learn a lot from doing a speaking engagement often, it does often feel like once you've really figured out the stuff that hits the mark, you tend to repeat that again and again, because it is the most effective, and it seems to be what touches people most. So it's not this learning process like writing is, and it's learning that I enjoy the most. But you can tell it really gives people something. And I care about that, so I do it anyway. I do it for that more than I do for keeping the book sales alive by far.
Well, speaking of book sales, I'm sure there'll be plenty of listeners that'll be interested to pick up a copy. So where should they hunt it down?
The best place is a website, frugalhedonism.com. Mm-hmm. And most bookstores will have it, maybe not in smaller areas, but most major bookstores will have it, or your more alternative bookstores too will tend to have it.
Well done. Hey, and just to finally wrap up, so you've mentioned that, you've always done plenty of travel.
And I should say the library too, of course.
Oh, of course, the library. Yeah, good point. But I just wanted to, as a sort of a sign off or a finish up. Now, most people that love travel, in my experience, they're coming home from one trip and they're already thinking about the next trip. So you as a very keen traveller, what's in your plans? What's coming up?
I did a huge trip just last year, mostly walking around the Scottish Highlands, and that was for 6 months. And when I got back, I felt so like I didn't want to travel for a long time anymore, or that if I do, the older I get, the more meaningful it becomes to me to just travel closer to home, because you understand the ecosystems better. So you're getting more incoming information as you look at them, because you sort of know what's going on already. And that even is true culturally. I've had enough like flamboyant, high contrast travel in far-flung parts of the world, I feel like. So at the end of this year, I'm going to do I've never done an overnight kayaking trip. Lots and lots of, month-long hiking trips, but I've never done an extended kayaking trip. So me and my partner are going to go do a week or maybe even 2 in a kayak going down probably the Glenelg River.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that'd be something different. Sounds
Yeah,
like a great
and
adventure.
it will be something that we never forget, and it probably won't cost us more than $500 each,
Yeah.
And that will be a massive experience that is drilled into our brains for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And that will be without trying to scrimp or save too much. It's just as soon as you're camping and eating oats and rice and relying on the natural world for your holidays, then it gets pretty cheap.
Well done. That sounds like a fantastic adventure. I like it. All right. Well, look, thank you, Annie. Thanks very much for being so generous with your time and sharing your thoughts. And as I say, genuinely, I really enjoyed your book, and I do hope that people pick it up and give it a read, because I think there's lots of great ideas and thoughts there. So thank you for writing it too, and making the contribution. All right. Well, all the best. And as I say, thanks very much for your time.
Excellent. It was fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Financial Autonomy podcast. Please keep in mind that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature. Your financial needs, circumstances, and objectives are unique to you. Before embarking on any investment or financial strategy, you are strongly encouraged to obtain professional advice tailored specifically for you. Need some help reaching your financial autonomy goal? Visit the Work With Me page at financialautonomy.com.au to learn how Paul and the Financial Autonomy team can help you succeed.